I want to move on to topic 2 now. And I bring this up because we're all currently sitting in our homes, most of us at least, where we have been for the last few months. And I think that one of the biggest problems that we're going to run into is that being primarily a work from home environment now has made security extremely complicated. So let's think about this. We have spent years building our enterprise like a bastion host. We have firewalls, we have data loss prevention systems, and we have, IDS, IPS strung everywhere, and it's perfect. Everything is beautiful. It's like a military base. And then we send everybody to home, and we're like, okay, work from your house with crappy Wi-Fi, things that I bought at a big box department store, and I can't monitor that. So my DLP box is basically useless now. Those big, bad defenses don't work when the Army is in the field, basically. So we have to think about how that is impacting us. Not only that, that's one house. That's my house. Times how many employees do you have? And you run the gamut from people who have no idea what they've got going on, so they just have the ISPs provided equipment doing things that it's supposed to, versus the super tech nerd folks who can't figure out why their VPN can't connect, and it turns out that they've started blocking all external facing IPsec traffic because of this thing they saw that will get rid of ads or something, I don't know. But could you imagine the nightmare for a help desk trying to troubleshoot all of that? I had a hard enough time doing it with 2 routers, let alone 200. And here's the other problem that we have. When it's our enterprise network, when it's a thing that we are in control of, I can make unilateral decisions. I am blocking BitTorrent traffic on this network. There is no argument as to whether or not I can use that or not. Well, at home, my kids' games use BitTorrent to deploy patches. Well, if I block all BitTorrent traffic on my network at home, I've got a problem. If my corporate people decide they don't want BitTorrent running through my device, now I've got a problem. How do you separate enterprise from home? And how do you enforce security on a network you don't control? These are all very complicated issues that we have to sort out, because I don't know about you, but I don't plan on going into an office anytime soon. And there are a lot of folks, especially people at Google, who are projecting that the first half of 2021 is essentially a wash when it comes to working from home. I just spent all this money on this cool new gear from working from my house. I don't really want to have to go back and deal with those crappy firewalls anytime soon. So I want to get some thoughts from our delegates around that. Do you feel like work from home is going to make security needlessly complicated?
Well, the vendor answer is going to be just deploy SD-WAN. I mean, that's what all of them are going to say. But you also need to take into account, are they doing their work on a corporate provided machine, or are they using their home system? If it's a corporate provided machine, you can put an always on VPN on it and pipe that back to a concentrator in the cloud or on your own premises. If they're doing it from their own system, you're extremely limited in what you can do.
I like to look at it. Has work from home complicated security? No. Has it made things harder? No. Has this always been a problem? Absolutely. Has it exposed this problem that people have mostly been hiding? Usually on the like, oh, we've got 100,000 employees and 10 of them use VPN or whatever arbitrary number. Then now they realize they need to open that door up significantly. It has definitely opened the door to not just security problems, but data protection problems and data privacy and so many other issues as well. So it's not just, this has not introduced any problem that hasn't always been here. It's just increased the scale at which the problem is starting to be realized to the point of they know we need to actually start investing in security. We need to start investing in these protection mechanisms we've needed all along. The same type of approach of having to increase the pipes for their internet connection, as well as the pipes and the speed that they have to their cloud services. It's the same problem we've always had. It's just now it's a much larger issue, so it's starting to get the attention that it deserves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's highlighted the deficit of lack of effort that's gone in for remote or distributed employees. Everyone sort of fit in 2 categories before, right? You had main office workers, and then you had remote employees. And they were always the exception. Now it's a distributed workforce. That's what I like to use. It's not remote employees anymore. It's a distributed workforce. And are you taking considerations in the same way? So to Chris's point, it's very very applicable. I think part of the challenge that comes up with the comment before, I think that was made is the reality is you have so many people working from home that now have IPv6 enabled and IPv4. And if you're not doing the right stuff with V6 at your corporate head end for VPN, you just have VPN breakout problems with V6 all day because G Suite and Office 365 are available on V6. And if you have no policy about how to route stuff back and you think you're getting a full tunnel on V4, your end users are still going straight out via V6 right out to those cloud resources and totally bypassing everything you're doing. So I think figuring out how to put the right sets of controls in place and having the right sets of software to help your end users do the right thing and protect them, but still allow them to be able to do the stuff at home is really important. I don't think there's anyone that's got a great solution today. There's some reasonable ones, but I don't think anyone's really sort of hit that sweet spot about what needs to happen to sort of get the right defense posture, but also allow people to still do those things. Because we are now going into people's homes. You're being welcomed into my home as part of the work is coming into my place, not me going into work. And so I think it's very different in terms of how we need to think about policy.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more, but couldn't be that these problems were already there, but they were just below the surface, because with everybody moving to the cloud, to public services, you were already having these more complex security posture that things were in one cloud or the other and they needed to talk to each other. So we were already moving away from that military defense base, that bastion with all the security, and working from home has just accelerated that trend and made more visible that you cannot do it with the bastion anymore. You need to have that zero trust paradigm or SASE paradigm to actually keep that security more in control. Whether it's on a corporate device or in a BYOD device, you need to get more into security anyhow.
I agree with my fellow delegates here, right? Work from home has always been there, just at a smaller scale. So if your enterprise had solved your security problem back then they now just have to make sure that it's scalable, because more and more people are going to be working from home. But if they didn't, then good luck. So we have to solve it now.
I think another aspect of this also is not just the complicated security from protecting the enterprise, but protecting the employees as well. We have some privacy concerns now. If the employer takes over the monitoring of the internet or the privacy aspect of what they're seeing on the employees' machines or personal networks that have nothing to do with work.
I think one other issue, which isn't necessarily policy or any of that, but we called out the major supply chain issue because of the pandemic. I mean, you're talking that even companies with really good policy, really good procedure, they just couldn't get the equipment they needed for 3 to 4 months. And then once they were finally able to, you come down with a lot of your employees are not going to be in major internet hubs. Some of them, they might still have ISDN or not ISDN. They might have dial-up or other sort of access. That's what I'm facing with a lot of my customers that have small branch offices or manufacturing, where the community that the manufacturer is in is not a rich area. So it really came down to a problem of how are you going to care for those users who might not be tech literate, or they might not have access to someone to set up the gear or have the internet access needed for this. So with that, you're talking about people using home systems that are old, unpatched, XP, Win 7, and then even if you give them equipment, they still won't be able to utilize it.
I would agree with you, Jared, that in any situation that we find ourselves running into, the number of unknown issues that we have out there is legion. And I would hope that people were moving off of moving off of older technologies and onto things like SD-WAN and SASE. but we can't guarantee that. So is the solution here kind of, as Michael brought up at the very beginning, do we provide corporate connectivity equipment that can be managed and configured and kind of help users segregate their work from home networks?
I think you might have to, because, well, most providers here in Europe, apologies, their modem, their modem is not really that professional style, professional grade. I mean, I know I'm working from a reasonably secure home network with my equipment, but that's because I worked from home for a long time and I've invested in that. But many home networks, they don't have that high advanced firewall. So if you really want to do that data loss and have that policy, then either go with SASE or bring corporate devices one way or the other to your employees to have a structural work from home and to reduce that attack surface that has exponentially increased. I mean, I read recently that the number of phishing attacks was increased exponentially already in 2020, in the first 3 months. They were already at the same numbers as 2019 in the number of phishing attacks.
Well, I want to touch on a different part of security that's been known about, but it's kind of opened its ways in a slightly different way, especially in these pandemic type conditions. We've had the work from remote scenario where you've had people working out of a Starbucks or, fill in blank of their favorite coffee shop, and the other people inside are able to hear potentially compromising conversations and such like that, to where usually like a corporate mandate's gone out to say you can't talk about certain things in these forums. And just 45 minutes ago, sitting here at my home, I was overhearing someone walking around outside having a very I'd say corporate sensitive conversation that I'm able to hear the entire thing as they're walking around having this conversation on the phone. And I've had countless times as I would be outside also on a call and listening to these other people sharing corporate sensitive information on their phone call because they feel like they're in their work from home office. They feel like they're in a protected, safe setting, but they're out there exposed to the world. And that's a lot harder for an organization to protect against because you don't know where the person that's now working from home or remote is, and you don't know if they're in a safe setting when they're actually sharing confidential information.
That's a very good point. That's a behavior I see even outside of corporate information. The number of people that I've heard in airports, coffee shops give out their own personal sensitive information is just insane, on top of expecting people who don't have behaviors to protect their own information to protect corporate information in public is a very complicated, tough matter.
Yes, but it's not because of the pandemic. It's always, it's from a long time ago. It's several years ago, I spent 5 hours in a train and was able to see the screen of the guy just behind me and just in front of me. And it was written in red across over the screen, confidential, and I was able to read everything. So I think that the pandemics create a need of awareness for people or for workers about the security, even if not only for their enterprise, but also at home too. Because I don't know in United States, but in France, there are default password in every provider box, and I can say that 90% of the case I can enter in the box anywhere at everybody's home because they didn't change the default password in their provider box, in the internet box, and I think that it's not only for the enterprise. And if you are an enterprise, if you are if you are aware of the security of, if you take it very seriously, generally when you have remote workers, you already have the VPN gateway. You already deployed the BioD concept for your remote workers. So, but in France, we don't have the culture of remote work, and people don't use and don't want to accept this culture, and so the enterprise weren't prepared for that. They weren't prepared to have as much as remote workers than during the pandemics. And that's why now there's almost 50% of enterprise who ask their employers to come back at the office. And so, but it's not because the security defense are problems. It's just because of a culture. It's a culture problem, not a security defense problem or a lack of tools or something like that.
You have to go off that. For years, we haven't trained people about discretion of what they're talking about in the situations where they're talking about it. All the security training has been around, okay, don't click on this phishing email. That link over there, that looks weird. Don't click on that. So we're now expecting them to be out in the world and know that, okay, this thing that says confidential, or maybe it doesn't, but it is of still sensitive nature. They don't know that they shouldn't be talking about that out in the middle of the grocery store or the coffee shop. They're just still acting like they're in an office with their peers. So it comes back to user education and making sure that they know how to work in the current situation that for a lot of people had been their normal, but is now the normal for everyone.
Yeah, I think Michael brings up a good point about the security awareness and the education of our end users, where in the past, maybe we've given them examples of how to protect work and how to protect the employer without getting them interested in how to protect themselves and at home and their own skin in the game. You know, how many users have actually changed their PIN number at their bank recently, you know, versus how many times they changed their password. You got to show them what's in it for them.
Well, you're also dealing with a lot of times companies pander to the C-level executives, no matter how much they might compromise data or security. So often a lot of these issues are top-down approach. I mean, there's one famous backup software company that started making a desktop version because the CEO would leave his laptop on trains. So that's something that happens so often. They just made a new product to fix it. When we start talking about this as well, we're seeing a lot of those over-encroaching type of management start to affect people's home life as well. I've had a couple of customers come to me and ask about what software can I use for key logging or making sure I'm monitoring my employees when they're at home or knowing they're working when they should be. And luckily, I have the ability to say, I don't want to talk about this and I'm not going to help you put spyware on your systems, but not everyone has that ability. That's something that we definitely have to think about. I know there's companies out there putting keyloggers, webcam monitoring software, other sort of privacy breaking software on people's personal systems because those systems might be used for work. And that's a huge complication in the security arena, down to the point where it might be breaking laws depending on where the person lives or sits.
I feel like we're starting to make that mistake that security-minded people tend to do, which is let's find every risk, let's find every way to mitigate that risk. And now we've impeded user productivity to the point where they're actively working against us because they need to get their job done. So part of this discussion of how we're handling folks in this distributed workforce is, one, they need to be able to get to resources, and then it's up to the security team and the networking team, et cetera, to find out, to measure the risks, manage the risks, put as much effort into the highest risks as possible, and stuff like talking about a corporate meeting at a coffee shop, maybe you let that go, because otherwise, as Ed noted in our Slack channel, people are going to be walking around with the cones on their head to make sure that no sensitive information leaks. So I just want to make sure we also note that folks need to get stuff done. They're under a lot of stress, and so security can't be an impediment because end users will always find a way around it.
That's absolutely true, but in retrospect, does that mean that with so many people working from home, using home computers, with home networks, home quality providers, has that complicated that enterprise security? I think it has complicated it a bit because the attack surface has exponentially increased, specifically if it's all home-owned devices and not the corporate managed devices. Because you have a higher attack surface, and that's a challenge for security to really make that balance in the risk. That risk balance, okay, I've got so many home users now, am I going to restrict these applications that they are using from their home personal use too, or not? It's a tough balance.
It absolutely is, but I feel like we're always trying to aim for perfection when what we really need to do is make something that's manageable, operationalized, and focuses on reducing risk as opposed to eliminating risk. Like thinking about, okay, all these users are working from home, but they're probably accessing email in Azure or email in Gmail, where there are controls in place that are going to still be there, whether or not I'm in the corporate office or on a home network. And yes, you need to have something on the individual device, the end user device, to provide some level of security. And so there is an extra level of complication, but I feel like we can also go too far.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Drew. But I think we overcorrect on that side entirely too much. I think it's one of these interesting use cases where there's two factors that go into that. Number one, most corporations do a horrible job actually defining what is protected information and how important it actually is. Way too much goes in that bucket. There's probably, I would probably argue 95% or more of the data that they're claiming needs to be protected by the intellectual property is complete garbage. It's 80% of the same crap that everyone else is using. So if you think your terms and conditions are somehow need to be protected when everyone else is signing those in the public domain, it's just ridiculous. So I think there's a lot that needs to free up, and I do think that moving towards SaaS and cloud-based models really pushes off what the security team needs to evaluate from a concern standpoint, and it sort of concentrates around that. And I think it does push that identity becomes much more important in terms of managing that side of it versus managing necessarily access and identity, versus managing the end device, which really in this day and age should be pretty much disposable and replaceable within hours to days, that you can just sort of discard that and move on to a net new device. And if you have that sort of principle in hand, refreshing things becomes much easier, and probably keeping compliance becomes easier too.
Well, that touches very closely on Tom's third point of how do you protect networks and devices you don't control. And while, as you're saying, Ed, that devices really should be able to be discarded, the problem we had that was kind of pandemic driven is organizations couldn't get their hands on equipment, so they were having to kind of fall prey to whatever device people happen to be using to try to go and access, because these were not work from home users in the first place. They were just users who normally went into a workspace. So in the traditional model, we would throw all our money at trying to protect the edge and the perimeter of the organization. But suddenly that's now spread out to hundreds of thousands, millions of these end devices that are now off in these different places that may not have the same configuration control and protection and mechanisms and everything that we're used to. So now these things are open to, hey, let's do a showdown search, try to find some devices inside these organizations and go and try to attack and isolate and be able to get into each of those devices individually. And we can do our attack at the corporation at scale. Because when I think of when we have the SD-WAN conversation, we get SD-WAN, everyone's home, we're safe. But that's not going to stop the person who's going to go and compromise the endpoint machine and then just be able to, because once you're on the machine, you're in that SD-WAN, you're safe. You're now protected while you do all of your attacking internally in the organization. And it's terrifying, and more standards need to be in place, but everyone's been rushing to try to get just some modicum of corporate level protection at a decentralized model. It's definitely not perfect, and I don't necessarily see us getting there in the next 18 months easily.
And you also can't do a one-size-fits-all approach. The protection you need to provide your knowledge workers that just use a web-based email even when they're in the office isn't necessarily the same as for your people that are dealing with your finance and HR backend systems and other truly sensitive data. You need to focus on providing the high level of protection to those that deal with the truly sensitive data.